Have you ever noticed how sometimes it seems that we are our own enemies? Imagine the following scenario. Someone decides to adopt a more balanced lifestyle with well-defined goals, such as starting a physical exercise routine and improving their diet. In the beginning, enthusiasm takes over, everything seems to be on track. However, mysteriously, this person begins to postpone going to the gym. She promises herself that she will start next Monday, but when the day arrives, an inexplicable tiredness or sudden discouragement appears, and the plan is set aside. This type of situation is more common than you might think. As much as we set goals clearly and even create a detailed plan to achieve them, we end up being surprised by attitudes that seem to take us away from the goal. Sometimes, we make decisions that border on the irrational, feel unexpected mental blocks, or even manifest physical symptoms such as pain and fatigue that prevent us from moving forward. This feeling of being sabotaged by yourself can generate intense frustration, especially because we cannot understand why we can never achieve what we want so much. But after all, what explains this contradictory behavior? Why, at certain times, do we seem to destroy our own dreams without a clear reason? Carl Jung, a renowned Swiss-born psychiatrist, dedicated much of his life to the study of the human unconscious. In his investigations, he came to shocking conclusions about what we now call self-sabotage. One of his greatest contributions was the concept of the shadow. According to Jung, the shadow represents a deep sector of the unconscious mind, where we deposit the aspects of our personality that we consider unacceptable. This dark region of the psyche is made up of traits of ours that have been rejected either because they do not fit into our parents' expectations, social rules, or because they have caused us pain at some point in life. So we push those traits into a hidden place within ourselves, as if they are no longer part of who we are. However, as Jung warns in several works, repressing these contents does not solve the problem. In fact, this suppression can have negative consequences. These banished aspects of the conscious begin to act on their own, outside of our will, and often interfere in our decisions without us realizing it. It is at this point that self-sabotage sets in. The parts of us that have been rejected begin to act in opposition to our conscious desires, as if we were enemies of ourselves, a silent, internal war whose motives we cannot clearly identify. For Jung, the way out is not to continue repressing these unwanted parts, but rather to integrate them. That is, to bring to consciousness what is hidden in the unconscious. He said that consciousness can easily be dominated by unconscious influences, which are sometimes wiser and more authentic than the rational thoughts of the ego. This process of integration is what he called individuation, the path of self-knowledge and inner completeness. Many people, when they hear about shadow, associate this concept with something only negative, as if it were an evil or dark side of the personality. However, this idea is limited. The shadow is not only composed of bad impulses, it contains everything that has been rejected for some reason, including positive potentials, repressed abilities, or emotions that we have not learned to deal with. The unconscious mind can be compared to a dark room. In this space, we lock up everything we still can't face, old pains, frustrations, traumas, and also parts of ourselves that simply didn't fit the image we created of ourselves. When we talk about working with the shadow, we are referring to taking these forgotten objects out of this room and bringing them into the light of consciousness. The problem is not necessarily in the stored content, but in the fact that it is hidden, outside our conscious field of vision, which generates impulsive behaviors, intense and often irrational emotional reactions. Jung explained that unconscious motives have considerable strength, and can easily overcome rational decisions, especially when it comes to important issues for our lives. The repressed fragments of our personality, these so-called mini-personalities, operate independently of what we believe to be our true self. That is, the ego, which is the part of us that we consciously recognize, has no control over these separate portions of our identity. Each of these shadow-dwelling mini-personalities has their own way of seeing the world, their specific needs, and distinct goals. And often, these goals come into direct conflict with what our ego wants to achieve. It is precisely this divergence that gives rise to the feeling of sabotaging oneself. It is as if, at the same time that we want to move forward, something in us pulls in the opposite direction. Only by recognizing these forgotten parts and integrating them into consciousness can we break the cycle of self-sabotage. This journey of integration is essential for those who want to understand themselves more deeply and achieve a more authentic, full, and coherent life. When the goals set by the conscious mind collide with the hidden desires harbored in the shadow, powerful inner tensions arise within us. This silent battle often translates into procrastination, resistance for no apparent reason, and attitudes that end up undermining our own efforts. Self-sabotage manifests as if something inside us is trying to keep us from moving forward, even when everything seems to be in our favor. Let's imagine a practical case to illustrate how this happens in real life. Think of a man who recognizes himself as a reserved person, who appreciates solitude, and who has always wanted to live in isolation, running an online business away from the hustle and bustle of cities. He sees this life as ideal, free from major social interactions and dependence on others. For him, total independence is the ultimate goal. However, even with clear opportunities arising along the way, he acts contrary to what he says he wants. He receives an advantageous offer to acquire a remote land for a very affordable price, but refuses. There is no objective or logical reason for the decision, only a vague justification. At another point, he begins to attract a growing number of followers to the blog he created about alternative lifestyle. This would represent a promising step towards his financial freedom, but without concrete explanation, he abandons the project. To those who observe from the outside, and even to the ego itself, which is the conscious part of it, these attitudes make no sense. After all, he dreamed for years about this lifestyle and made a lot of efforts to prepare himself. Why, then, are you sabotaging your own achievements? The explanation may lie in the existence of a repressed content in his shadow, a part that he does not consciously recognize, but which remains active within him. This part can be linked, for example, to a deep fear of living completely alone. Or it may hide a desire to be seen, to gain validation, and to connect with others. While the ego believes that it seeks solitude as an ideal lifestyle, this shadow silently fights against the realization of this plan, because it fears complete isolation. This internal conflict generates a continuous cycle of frustration. With each step taken towards the goal, a contrary force arises that prevents continuity. The result is contradictory decisions, sudden abandonments of promising projects, and a persistent feeling that something is out of place. Until this repressed part is not recognized, accepted, and integrated into the personality, man will continue to be trapped in this cycle, where his dreams are always on the verge of being fulfilled, but never come true. It is as if there were an invisible guest inhabiting the most hidden parts of his soul, someone who acts behind the scenes, interfering behind the scenes without ever fully revealing himself. This something that sabotages your plans cannot be fought rationally, because it is not accessible to the logic of the conscious mind. It is hidden, camouflaged in the shadows of the psyche. As long as he does not bring this aspect into the light of consciousness, he will continue to act like a puppet whose threads are pulled by an invisible manipulator. This manipulator, as Jungian analyst Dr. Murray Stein reminds us, is what Jung called the autonomous complex. It is a psychic fragment that, when it is not under the control of the conscious will, begins to act in a possessive manner. The greater its strength, the greater its influence on the person's thoughts, emotions, and actions. When these dark complexes take the helm of consciousness, the consequences can be quite damaging. Intense, hard-to-control emotions come out of nowhere: unbridled anger, deep sadness, impulsive behaviors. These feelings seem to take over the being, as if they came from a place that is beyond the reach of reason. And indeed they are. They are clear signs that there is something inside us that needs to be seen, heard, and understood. Dr. Stein explains that complexes have the power to block personal development, preventing the person from advancing in the process of self-knowledge. They do this by pushing the mind into emotional dead ends. One may, for example, get stuck in an uncontrollable desire for revenge for past traumas, or immerse oneself in nostalgic memories that paralyze one, preventing any progress. The complex that inhabits the shadow of the solitary man described above perhaps represents precisely this repressed desire for human contact. Wounded by old experiences, he rejected this part of himself, believing it made him vulnerable. However, when he denied it, he did not realize that it would gain strength in the darkness and start to influence his life in a disguised way. This rejected personality has become a kind of parallel government that covertly sabotages the actions of the official self. This dark aspect wants to be recognized. He wants his emotions, desires, and needs to be considered. Therefore, it interferes with choices that are moving towards isolation, creating unexpected obstacles. Still, he fears being exposed. After all, it was rejected for representing something that, in the past, caused pain. If it is brought to light, it will lose its ability to act freely. Thus, he oscillates between two desires, to be accepted and to remain hidden, sabotaging everything as a form of resistance and self-protection. Only by understanding this duality does it become possible to interrupt the cycle of self-sabotage. The path is difficult, but necessary, to illuminate what is hidden and give voice to the forgotten parts of oneself. As Jung stated in his work Memories, Dreams, Reflections, true growth only occurs when we are willing to dive into the depths of our being and integrate all its fragments, even the most uncomfortable ones. True inner freedom is born when we are able to look inward with courage and willingness to welcome what we have avoided. The integration of the shadow, as Jung proposed, is not a simple or immediate process, but it is an essential step for us to live with more authenticity and balance. Often, these forgotten parts of the psyche manifest in the moments when we most desire to grow. When we are about to take an important step, starting a new relationship, changing careers, pursuing an old dream, obstacles arise that seem to come out of nowhere. We do not realize that, in fact, we are dealing with internal fragments that have not been listened to and, therefore, cry out for attention, sabotaging our plans. These aspects do not want to destroy us. On the contrary, they want to be recognized. They want to participate in the construction of who we are in an integral way. Repressing emotions, desires, and characteristics that we deem inappropriate may seem like a short-term solution, but in the long term it generates internal disconnection, emotional disorder, and contradictory attitudes. It is common for the shadow to manifest itself in a symbolic way. Sometimes, through intense dreams, exaggerated reactions to banal situations, or impulses that we cannot rationally justify. These signs are invitations from the unconscious so that we can reconnect with parts of ourselves that have been left aside. Ignoring these calls only prolongs suffering and strengthens the silent action of self-sabotage. Self-sabotage, therefore, is not a moral defect or a character flaw. It is a cry of internal parts that have not been integrated. It is as if there is within each of us a forgotten I that wants to return to the scene and actively participate in life. When we ignore it, it reacts, creating blockages, postponements, indecisions, and even physical symptoms. To integrate the shadow is to recognize that we are complex, multiple, paradoxical. It is accepting that within us there are opposing desires, fears, and aspirations that sometimes contradict each other. Rather than fighting against it, Jung proposed that we open up internal space for these contents, allowing all aspects of our personality to take place. This integration process requires self-knowledge, patience, and a willingness to face discomfort. It is not a matter of justifying negative or impulsive attitudes, but of understanding their origins and transforming them into awareness. When we bring to light what is hidden, we are no longer hostages of internal forces that previously dominated us without us knowing it. In practice, this can mean revisiting past experiences that have left marks, identifying recurring behavior patterns, recognizing repressed emotions, and dialoguing internally with these aspects. Psychotherapy, especially the Jungian approach, can be a valuable avenue for this type of work, as it provides tools to access and interpret the content of the unconscious. Jung believed that each person carries within themselves a potential for individuation, that is, the possibility of becoming what they really are. This process involves accepting not only the visible and socially accepted qualities, but also the impulses, pains, and limitations that we avoid seeing. By integrating all this, we stop being fragmented and start to live more wholly. The true overcoming of self-sabotage, therefore, will not come through isolated willpower or magic productivity formulas. It is born from a deep process of reconciliation with who we are as a whole. When we understand the motives behind our resistances, they cease to have power over us. It is worth remembering that this is not a linear path. There will be advances and setbacks. There will be moments of doubt and self-discovery. But with each step taken towards integration, a little more clarity and balance is established in our life. We stop living in automatic mode, reactive and confused, and start to act with more awareness, choosing with freedom and responsibility the path we want to follow. As Jung once said, what you resist persists, what you accept is transformed. The shadow need not be feared. It is part of us and carries hidden riches. When we look at it with respect and curiosity, we find fragments of our true selves waiting to be welcomed. Overcoming self-sabotage is not about erasing our internal contradictions, but about recognizing them and learning to dialogue with them. It is an invitation to become whole, true, and aware of our human complexity. This path, although challenging, is what leads us to inner freedom, emotional maturity, and a life more aligned with who we are in essence.